It started. Welcome to today's Credo AI webinar, Enterprise AI Model Selection, How to Score, Select, and Scale Third-Party AI for the Enterprise. My name's Lucas Stewart. I'm in product marketing here, and today I'm joined by our head of AI governance research, Ian Eisenberg. Hi, Ian. Do you want to introduce yourself and talk about what you do here at Credo AI?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Ian, and leading the AI governance research team basically involves trying to understand how the AI landscape is changing, particularly from the perspective of enterprise governance, and creating new ways for our platform and for enterprises in general to adopt AI safely, as quickly as possible, and yeah, everything like that. So excited to talk to.
Awesome. Thank you, Ian. I'm always just so impressed by the things Ian puts out, and I think you guys will be too. So today's agenda is I'm going to set the stage with the enterprise AI demands this year, and then two recent publications that I think are super important and underscore the need for an enterprise AI model selection framework. And then Ian will take it away with these model trust scores and talk about AI governance tooling a little bit. If anyone has a question, I know this is a pretty complex area. Please submit it via the Q&A feature on the Zoom panel, and we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. This could be about model versions, anything you want. And if either of us are unable to answer your questions, then I'll get to them via email after the webinar is concluded. So we like to make sure that people really get informed and educated on Credo AI webinars. So there's no dumb questions and no questions too complicated either. All right, let's get started. So I want to talk about enterprise AI demands in 2025. And actually, surprisingly, the kind of business and enterprise AI demands are encapsulated by this sentence that's actually from the new White House memorandum M2521 on accelerating federal use of AI. And that is to redefine AI governance as an enabler of effective and safe innovation. And I thought it was crazy when I read this in the memorandum, which came out like earlier this month, because I heard the exact same thing from our AI governance customers at Credo AI, that internally they need to redefine or rebrand their AI governance team because they are being expected to drive AI adoption and innovation through governance. So people on the call are probably familiar with asks coming from whether executives or the board or the customers of your AI products that you need to innovate with AI quickly, which means using frontier models, scale AI rapidly somehow, adding use cases and rolling out use cases across teams and departments, while staying cost effective and ensure AI ROI, anchor icon because of the sunk costs that can really happen through really expensive AI projects that have failure to launch. And then the fourth and maybe most important enterprise AI demand is trust. That's from public, regulatory, and internal. And I want to emphasize internal because we're seeing so many enterprises using so much AI internally to run their core operations, and your employees need to be able to trust your internal AI as well. So to those on the call, just think about like today, can you choose the AI model that meets these demands specific to your industry? Maybe not, but hopefully after today's webinar, you can with the model trust scores for the enterprise models you're considering using. So on our Credo AI webinars, I like to give a snapshot of kind of the current situation of AI or AI governance. There's two reports recently that I think really underscore the need to understand your AI model selection process before you start innovating with that model. And it's the memorandum, which I mentioned earlier, Accelerating Federal Use of AI Through Innovation, Governance, and Public Trust. And then the report I eagerly anticipate each year, the Stanford High 2025 AI Index Report. So I pulled out a couple of brief highlights from these that, again, hopefully set the stage for what Ian is going to talk about. But from the first, I shared that quote that AI adoption and innovation are the new mandates for governance teams, not just AI teams, but for AI governance teams. The word AI governance is all over this memorandum. And, I really wasn't expecting anything like this coming from the White House in April of this year. There are 10 urgent requirements that must be met within 60 to 365 days, which I've listed here. And the shortest is actually federal agencies appointing a chief AI officer. So clearly you can see this impetus to innovate quickly with AI through governance. The memorandum says agencies must redefine AI governance as an enabler of effective and safe innovation. I again think this is super true for enterprise AI governance teams, and so we really want to help you do that. And the second report, which is like around 450 pages, I've just distilled some stats relevant to today's webinar. But my take is that we are in the wild west of AI adoption. It's exciting and it's dangerous. And it's getting really hard. It's getting harder and harder to select an AI model and know your potential outcomes and risks without a nuanced score, something like what Ian's going to talk about. Because if we look at the first stat, the performance gap between top AI models is shrinking. So the top 10 models, and this is Stanford's language for how they scored, performance, which might be different than ours. But basically, although there's this 5% difference, there's going to be vastly different outcomes based on your use case. So you can't just go on like the leaderboards anymore and pick number one. And at the same time, other metrics like safety and latency are just wide ranging and can change from industry to industry between 25 to 91%, according to this, just for model safety refusal rates from this report. And that's when the model says, I can't provide that because of our safety constraints. So huge ranges of these kind of like sub metrics other than performance. And then, of course, cost. I mean, if you're just chasing the smartest model, without thinking about costs, you can wreak havoc on your budgets and therefore the efficiency you were trying to gain with AI. So again, this report is over 400 pages long, but so much in it underscores the need for model trust scores. Um, all of that to say, enterprise AI trust is a symphony of things. Enterprise AI governance is kind of the orchestration of these factors that you care most about. And it AI governance, sorry, oversees, infrastructure deployment, legal and compliance, security and governance, and technical. These are sort of the non-negotiable considerations when selecting your AI model. And on that note, I want to pass it over to Ian to talk about that enterprise AI model selection process.
Awesome. Thanks for the overview, Lucas. So today we're going to be talking about model trust scores, which is a new approach that we've developed to synthesize information from many different sources, primarily kind of public information that we have about AI vendors and models, and the public benchmarks that we know about into a more kind of crystallized and use case contextualized set of model trust scores. So can we go to the next slide? So the two components here are first, what we call these non-negotiable requirements: security, infrastructure, compatibility, whether you're using data for the foundation model that I, as an organization, feel comfortable using. And this, in some ways, is the most important. It's non-negotiable, and also the simpler aspect. This is the kind of emerging trends that we're seeing in how contracts are laid out, what kind of features different AI systems might give. And so this is really a part of general third-party risk management and procurement. So it's the first component. The second is contextualizing complex evaluations and benchmarks into use case specific insights. And so we're going to spend the bulk of the time today talking about this. How do we bring a bunch of benchmarks together? And if you want to go more into the methodology that we use here, there's a paper that you can find at Credo AI, Model Trust Scores AI Evaluation. Now let's go to the next slide. So non-negotiables, like I said before, are kind of simpler to conceive of, but in the end are dependent on transparent information that we can collect into one place. And so we generally bucket these into infrastructure and deployment requirements, security and governance, legal, and technical. And some of these, as you can see in this data table here, are essentially just yes/nos that we can filter different models that you might want to use. And so general aspects of these non-negotiables might be things like, is the model being hosted on the infrastructure that I am already using? Of course, you can use other infrastructure, but you probably won't, right? If you're an AWS customer, you probably will be using the bedrock that AWS uses to host many models. Similarly, if you need to fine-tune the model or you're using it for commercial purposes, it's very important to know whether the licensing requirements support your use cases. And so we collect this information and then use that as kind of a filter that you can use to then make your first selection. Our own prediction here is that while this is a quite important, again, non-negotiable, we imagine that over time, AI systems and AI system providers are going to meet most enterprise needs along these dimensions. So right now, it may be the case that some commercial use licensing won't support you or something like this. But over time, foundation models do want the broadest range of organizations to be able to use them. And so we'll develop and we'll make sure that they hit non-negotiables over time. You can think of it like an emerging kind of SOC 2 around AI systems. And so right now, definitely pay attention to it, but we anticipate over time it'll become available for all models. Let's move on. The more difficult thing is benchmarks. How do you know how good each AI system is for your particular use case? And there are a few components here. One is how do you convert the many different measures you see just into a perspective of how good the model is in general? And what I'm showing here is one example of some benchmarks that are communicated by a company when they announce new models. So in this case, it's Claude's benchmarks when Anthropic released Claude 3.7. And we can see here some evaluations that are proprietary to Anthropic, some that, I don't know how well other models do, or it's at least not done by a third party. And we see some that are used by many models. For instance, IF-eval, this instruction following, has been used for models for years. So it's a way for us to compare across. But in these measures, right now, basically the ones that you're seeing on the screen, first of all, only really measure capability. We don't really have a sense of the safety of these models, the affordability or speed. Anthropic does, publish things related to safety, speed, and of course, it's just not on this slide. So being able to just integrate from many different sources into one database of all the metrics that we have that are publicly available about an AI system is important. Converting that into more easily digestible forms of just capability, safety, affordability, and speed is also important. And also dealing with the uncertainty that comes when you see a model that is doing well on one benchmark, but you actually don't have much information about them. They've only reported information on one or two benchmarks. In that case, we need to deal with uncertainty because it's likely that not only did the model not only are we not sure what the measures are, but companies, especially when they're reporting their own benchmarks, they sometimes censor poor performing benchmarks. And so when we don't see information, it might be indicative of the model's poor performance there. So third-party evaluations are very important because they do not differentiate, but we still need to synthesize. So what model trust scores is a synthesis of benchmarks throughout the ecosystem, wherever we can find them, and a conversion of that synthesis into capability, safety, affordability, and speed. Let's go to the next slide. So in the generic case, what this looks like is a leaderboard. And so what you're looking at here is our overall score, capability score, safety score, affordability, and speed for the models in our database in the generic aspect. And we'll come to use case contextualization later. But essentially, one of the things that jumps out, which might be a little hard to see with the GIF going, is that safety in particular is something that we don't have a ton of information from different models. So Claude 3.5 is currently our safest model, and that's not just a function of the safety of the model's behavior, but how much we know about its safety. So Claude 3.5 has been measured by independent third-party safety evaluations, which increase its safety. Our overall score here is a function of both capability and safety, and actually isn't taking into account affordability or speed. Let's go to the next slide. So that's an important point. When you create an overall score, when you see a leaderboard that tries to project everything into one score, you're making subjective trade-offs between different dimensions. You might do that because you're averaging a certain set of evaluations and not others, or using our parlance, where we have the dimensions of capability, safety, affordability, and speed, you're making some trade-off between those. And here we have an example of ways that we try to think about this. You could evenly weight all of these dimensions. You could be performance focused, outcome focused, security focused, or cost effective. But you could imagine any weighting that you could use. In the previous slide, I used a weighting of 50% capability and 50% safety, and no affordability and speed. Okay, let's keep going. When you have these measures, you can start to do things not just like what is the most capable model, but you can look at the relationship between capability and safety. And you can, in the end, we want to do this along all four dimensions, but that's harder to visualize. But that's fundamentally what we're doing at any point. As Lucas mentioned early on, you might look for the most capable model, but if you don't take into account affordability, you're probably not actually building a product. You want the most capable model for the lowest price so that you can actually build something that works and is sustainable for you as a business. In this plot, you can see this line of models in the center, which basically have the same safety version. There's actually not a ton of safety evaluations going on, so they're all doing relatively the same, but there's a difference in capability, with OpenAI's O3 being the most capable, then Gemini, then Claude 3.7, thinking with the reasoning component, and DeepSeek R1. So we do see, things that you've probably seen in other places, which is that reasoning models are definitely the most capable models right now. Let's go to the next slide. Similarly, we can see a trade-off between capability and speed, affordability. So in the top, that blue circle is Gemini 2.5. It's a fairly affordable model, and it's very capable. To the right, you see a slightly less capable model, but more affordable, which is O3 Mini, OpenAI's model. And then further to the right, you see the most affordable model, still at a good level of capability, which is DeepSeek R1. And so this reflects why there was such interest in DeepSeek R1. It is less capable. Actually, at the time, it was one of the most capable models. DeepSeek 2.5 and O3 Mini are around the same time, but R1 was much cheaper. So you're getting more intelligence for your buck. And we can see that by its point in the top right here. Okay, let's move on. So all of that was, something is missing on the slide. There we go. Okay, so all of this is just in the generic case. We have a bunch of metrics that we're averaging together in a slightly sophisticated way so you can see capability and safety. But fundamentally, what we care about is how good is this model for my use case? And this is where model trust scores distinguishes itself. So an intermediary step is we have a huge range of different metrics, and we calculate the relevance of that metrics to the capability and safety of every use case. And by relevance, I mean something like what you're seeing on the right here, which is, imagine you have a content moderation use case, and we're just going to talk about overall relevance here. Something like a measure of its hate speech kind of detection and safety is measured as extremely relevant to content moderation. Instruction following, which is a little more generic, it's not specific to content moderation, but it's pretty important for your moderator, is seen as high relevance. While other metrics like graduate level reasoning, GPQA, or mathematical reasoning are seen as low relevance or no relevant. And so this is the general thing that we do. For every use case, we say, is what this measure is measuring, is it important? And should we weight it in understanding how capable or safe is this model? So let's go to the next slide. And so we do this for every single use case we have. And I should be clear about what I mean by a use case. We have created a set of use cases that we believe are indicative of many different industries and the ways that they use AI systems. And so the things that I'm going to talk about today are going to be averages of this use case level analysis at an industry level. Using model trust scores, though, does not require using our use cases. In fact, the benefit of model trust scores is that you can calculate them for your particular use case. So what I'll talk about here is a set of use cases that we at Credo AI created to represent the use cases that we interact with and we see and we believe are kind of representative of what you might be using if you're part of a software engineering industry or defense industry. But everything that I'm talking about can be customized specifically to a particular use case. So here we're looking at metric relevance by capabilities. And the plot that you're seeing is a heat map where if it's very bright, the metric is very relevant, and if it's dark, it's not relevant at all. So we can already glean some information from this plot, which is there actually aren't that many publicly available evaluations that are highly relevant to any industry. There are a few, so I hover over them. You can see that legal bench is seen as quite relevant for the legal industry, not so surprising. And software engineering verified, which has real software engineering problems and uses that to evaluate how well an AI system can solve kind of real pull requests, is relevant for software engineering. Those make sense, but the vast majority are not going to be that specific to a particular industry. And this is another kind of takeaway here. While model trust scores synthesizes public benchmarks to give you a perspective, public benchmarks and therefore model trust scores are only as good as their relevance to particular use cases. And so one of the things that we're already seeing is we need more public benchmarks that are more specific to specific industries and use cases. Let's move to the next. Yeah, this is safety now. And so on the x-axis are actually the industries. The y-axis are the metrics. So most metrics are not relevant for safety, and that's by design. Almost all of them are capability metrics. A few of them, for instance, AI Luminate, which is created by ML Commons to be explicitly a safety measure, is deemed relevant for many different industries. And so we have these kind of cross-cutting safety measures, which do a pretty good job. But many of the measures, that's only one component of safety, and many of the measures that we have are clearly focused more on the capability of the system, though in the previous slide, we saw that some of them might not be the most relevant to a specific use case. Anyway, let's go to the next slide. Okay, one last point about these relevance scores. So while we're trying to create these relevance scores so that we can weight metrics for a particular use case, we're ultimately trying to get to what is the capability of this model for legal use cases. By doing this evaluation, it gives us a perspective on the ecosystem of benchmarks that exist. And so I was talking about this in the last slides, but here we can see it more clearly that there are few measures that are relevant for the capability of most industries. And safety, we actually have a general applicability thanks to the ML Commons AI Luminate. I would encourage you to look into this plot more through the paper, but I'll move on for now. Okay, so we have our relevance scores, and we can think of that as another weighting over all of the benchmarks to give ourselves our capability and safety measures. So just like we weight by our own subjective value of capability and safety, we can also now weight by a particular industry and a particular use case, which ends up giving ourselves a kind of a bias, an opinion about which metrics are important. And when we do that, we're able to get measures like specific to the financial services. So here I'm just going through the same things: overall capability, safety, etc. And we can do the same thing for legal or or any of the different industries we have here. And again, what's actually being done is these values are being calculated per use case, not per industry, the specific use case. And I'm averaging them for the purpose of visualization within the industry. And this is quite important because in the end, the use cases might cross-cut industries. So it's really the use case level that's the most important. But at a high level, you also get the benefit to say, hey, this model, I guess in this case, Gemini 2.5 is the most capable models for financial services. Okay, well, we're on AI governance tooling, but I'll stay here with just one last conclusion, which is the model trust scores are a summary of existing information. I really want to hammer that home. So for instance, Gemini 2.5, I think is a very capable model. Many people are recognizing that from different perspectives. But it also may be the case that it was measured more, or it does better on the measurements that exist that are relevant to the financial services. So one of the things that we like, if we are missing information about a model, then we do not list it as very high, because that doesn't necessarily mean that we know it's bad, but we don't know it's good. And so I think a really important thing when you're selecting your model for the enterprise, and this is related to Lucas's point that they're all quite close to each other, is you should be selecting a model that doesn't only look good on a few benchmarks, but has gone out of its way to prove itself to you that it is doing well in general and for your specific use case and industry. And then afterwards, you should run your own evaluations to further give yourself even more confidence for your particular use case, which I'm sure your data science team will do, those kind of things. But you really want to save yourself some effort by demanding, essentially, that foundation models prove themselves to you and have evaluated themselves on benchmarks that are relevant to you. Okay, so with the AI governance tooling, basically right now, the model trust scores that I showed to you is a paper that we publish and an approach to synthesize benchmarks. Credo AI is an AI governance platform. We integrate many different pieces of information together to allow you to govern your models, which includes govern your AI use cases, actually your AI systems, which of course includes which model are you using. So we're at the point where we're able to take a number of technical pieces of information, public benchmarks, but also the evaluations you do internally, and convert that into a perspective of which models are probably best for a particular use case before you do additional evaluations. But these aspects are not yet part of our platform. Can we go to the next slide? We're quickly moving in that direction, though. What I showed you here is the plots that we have from this more kind of exploratory scientific kind of pursuit. But here you're seeing the same kind of scores on the same dimensions in a more beautiful way, which will be integrated into the platform sometime in the second half of this year.
Thank you, Ian. So I was going to open it up to the Q&A, but I think that's an important point about this separation, and it speaks to the first Q&A question that I was going to share, which will definitely be a question for you, Ian. And it's I want to underscore the fact that model trust scores, came together in such an agile way in response to, frankly, the content around it is in response to DeepSeek R1, because our customers and the market needs to understand that you can't just chase the shiny object when it comes to selecting an AI model. You have to consider all of these factors and relationships together, cost, safety, affordability, legality, things like that. So I love that that we've broken that out. So anyone can submit a question via the Q&A feature on the Zoom panel. And then, so the first question I want to ask, because it's apropos to a conversation we were having earlier, Ian, is how does Credo AI stay up to date on new model versions like DeepSeek R2?
Right now, the way we're staying up to date is a mix of some kind of tracking scripts we've written, but honestly, a lot of manual work right now. We maintain a repository of all of the metrics that we see for the most important models. I won't say we track every model because there are many open source models that we don't track. And so we just maintain that list. Um,
Amazing.
Should I
So
respond to
I'm
any, or are you going to?
I'm handling a question just directly over chat. Um, so I maybe we might need the next question down. We might want the asker to expand on that unless you can answer the question about NLP. Ian, does that make sense to you?
What I'm taking from this question is right now they're only public, we're only using public benchmarks, which also assume a public model. And so one direction that we haven't gone yet, but is a fairly straightforward extension of what we're doing with model trust scores, is how do you expand the same approach to both um, private assessments? So even for public models, you might have your own internal assessments of the system, and those are definitely very important and probably quite relevant to your use case. But for private models, um, it would be kind of the same way. We would need to just allow you to out input your own evaluations. Right now, model trust scores are not actually running the evaluations. We're just synthesizing. It's a possible future direction, and we would love to talk to you if you cared about this direction for us to run evaluations ourselves, but that's not what's currently being done.
Thanks, Ian. And I if feel free to peruse the list in case I don't even understand the question being asked. But let's
Yeah.
move in
So
chronological order.
So Michael asks, hey, there's a lot of information here. How do I get to exactly what I need for this particular moment? So the answer is the more productized version. So right now, this is figuring out the kind of the approach. The next step, the product version, which we have in development right now, is much more this answer. So you put in your use case or select from them, and you just get your kind of leaderboard, which gives you overall numbers. So this is the top one. It communicates it based on the different dimensions. It gives you information about the how confident you should be in the safety and capability measures. And if you want to, you can dive further down. But that's ultimately the aspect. The points I made about um, different metrics and how relevant they are for different industries, that's more relevant for the ecosystem as a whole, like where should evaluations be built, but probably isn't relevant to you as one person who's trying to answer the question, which model should I use? Um, is there any idea to benchmark the benchmarks? So my background is actually in psychology and psychometrics. So this kind of question has a lot of kind of brings me back to construct validity and predictive validity. Basically, like what is a benchmark measuring, and do we care about it at all? Right now, we're creating relevance scores that are based on kind of a semantic relationship between what the benchmark proposes to measure and your use case. But that's not the same as um, does this benchmark actually predict the thing that it proposes to in the real world? And the reality is for model trust scores right now, we're not able to kind of get that real world information. But it's actually one of the aspects that I love about Credo AI, which is over time, we are getting information both about, technical measures and also just process, like how are companies governing their systems? And over time, we will get information about incidents. When did a model become or an AI system become too risky? When was it very valuable for the company? How quickly did it go into development? Those are kind of the real world outcomes that we ultimately want to be able to predict based on information like how are you governing your system and what benchmarks are you using?
And Ian, to add to that, I want to draw to your earlier point, which was the heat map table, and it's brighter. If the company provides more information, the way that Anthropic provides so much about safety, I think like such a core part of governance is knowing what you know and knowing your unknown unknowns. Because yeah, you said it perfectly, Ian, and I'll pull this quote, but it was like, would you rather use something where you do know the metrics, or like kind of you are just taking a risk, if you're choosing something where the company doesn't provide the metrics on safety, for example. I
Yeah.
love that.
Let me rapid fire a few of these last questions. I know, actually, I think we have a little bit more time. But
Yep, go
so
for it.
Brian asks about, do we do our own red teaming? And the answer is no to that for now. But again, it's in the same direction, which is right now we're synthesizing information, but creating context-specific information is quite important. So someone needs to do those evaluations, which includes red teaming or automated red teaming. And that might be us in the future, but that's not what this is about today. Um, okay, we got that one. Irene asks, mentioning using LLM as judge to determine the relevance of each metric for a particular use case. That is true. We use LLMs and our kind of custom prompting based on both the dimension, the use case, and the uh, the metric itself. I don't have much to say about it except we follow the general approaches here. We actually have the LLMs measure relevance on a Likert scale of a 5-point scale. We do this a number of times and kind of evaluate the inter-rater reliability of the LLMs. Yeah, that's all I'll say there. Okay, I think that's all of our questions right now.
Great. Well, if you have another question, you can always ask us over email. I will be sending out the slides, and which includes links to these reports I mentioned, and the recording to all registrants. So I really hope everyone on the call is just a little bit more empowered about selecting their enterprise AI model for their use case. And if you have additional questions about the Credo AI platform or something technical, feel free to reach out to myself or Ian, Lucas at Credo.ai, and Ian at Credo.ai. Thank you all so much for joining today. Bye-bye.